You all so much for being here. 57 years ago, on October 26, 1967, John McCain was captured and taken hostage as a prisoner of war. He would spend the next 5.5 years, 1,966 days in prison. After his release with 107 others, he never stopped advocating for the freedom of all those who are tortured, held hostage, and wrongfully held. My name is Pedro Pisano, and here at the McCain Institute, we seek to further Senator McCain's and his family's legacy for a safe, free, and just world. As someone born in Colombia, the scourge of hostage-taking and wrongfully detaining people is personal and unfathomable. There was a time where the ever-present fear of being taken hostage never left our bones. But as McCain used to say, mentioning he was quoting Chairman Mao, he said, "The night is always darkest before it turns pitch black." So a bit of light has arrived in Colombia, at least for hostage taking, and we hope, so help us God, that it slowly and surely arrives for all of those that are held hostage. Today, with our great partners from the Foley Foundation, Hostage US, New America, Human Rights Foundation, and World Liberty Congress, and the contributions of our many friends in government, and all of you, we developed a bipartisan event that will serve as a foundation for policy recommendations to prepare for the next administration, Congress, and the commemoration of the second U.S. National Hostage and Wrongful Detainee Day on March 9th. We're here to recognize the many successes of the last 10 years. This administration alone has brought back home over 70 Americans. The past administration brought home over 56. Since the now almost 10-year-old PPD 30 and Executive Order 13698, published on June 24, 2015, more than 160 Americans have come back. However, the Foley Foundation estimates that there are currently 39 Americans being held hostage or wrongfully detained. So, as the title of the event says, what is next for the hostage and deterrence enterprise? To start us off and frame our day is none other than Jen Daskell, the current Deputy Homeland Security Advisor and Deputy Assistant to the President of the United States. Her portfolio covers hostage affairs as well as many others. We're also proud to say that she served as an ASU Future Security Fellow in 2021. Thanks so much for being here, Jen, and for all you do. Thank you, as you wish.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh, great, okay. Good morning. So thank you, Pedro, and I really want to thank the McCain Institute for putting on this really important event and for inviting me to speak here today. As Pedro mentioned, in my role as Deputy Homeland Security Advisor, I have had the honor to work on the protection of Americans all around the world. And that includes the ongoing efforts to bring home unjustly detained Americans and hostages held in many different countries. Doing so has been a top priority of the Biden administration since day one. Over the last 4 years, President Biden has successfully brought home over 70 Americans from places all around the world, including Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Burma, Afghanistan, Haiti, Rwanda, West Africa, and other locations. Some of those brought home are very well-known names. Others are people that most everyone has never heard of. I have had the particular privilege on working on some of these cases, including the deal that brought home 6 Americans who had been wrongfully detained in Venezuela right before last Christmas, 4 other Americans who were held there, and also returned a fugitive from justice known as Fat Leonard to face bribery charges in December 2023. This deal also resulted in the release of 21 Venezuelan political prisoners from Venezuelan prison. In exchange, we sent one individual, Alex Saab, back, who was facing pending trial on money laundering charges, and he was sent back to Venezuela. I also will never, ever forget the raw emotions when Evan Gershkovich, Paul Whelan, and Alsu Kamasheva stepped off the plane in Andrews Air Force Base and were able to hug their families for the first time after being returned from detention in Russia. This was an incredible deal that involved the cooperation of 4 partner nations and resulted in the release of 16 individuals from Russian prison in exchange for the return of 8 individuals to Russia. And this involved a combination of engagement by the United States, by Germany, by Slovenia, by Poland, and by Turkey as well. As National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said at the time, this was the biggest exchange of individuals since the Cold War. And we are simply not aware of any exchange involving so many US partners and allies working together to free a combination of unjustly detained Americans, human rights activists, and political dissidents held in Russia's prisons. These cases aren't easy. They take time. They take too much time. They take way too much time for the loved ones who are here waiting for their family members, friends, partners to come home. And they require hard decisions. Time and again, this president has shown that he's been willing to make some of those very hard decisions. But we also, and he also, thinks hard about the questions that I know are going to be the main topic of today, which is prevention and deterrence and the precedent that some of these decisions set. That is why in 2022, President Biden signed an executive order that built on the 2020 Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act, also known by most of us here as the Levinson Act, by empowering the Department of State to impose sanctions and visa restrictions on those who engage in the wrongful detention of Americans. The US government has since issued sanctions against individuals and entities in Iran, Russia, and Africa, locking their property and cutting them off from the legitimate financial system for their role in wrongful detentions and hostage taking. And in 2022, the State Department issued a new risk indicator. It's known as the D risk indicator that warns travelers if there is a particular threat of wrongful detention in the country to which an individual might be seeking to travel. This is on top of an already tiered travel warning system that the State Department issues. We urge everyone to check these warnings before they travel. If a country is listed as tiered 4, meaning do not travel, if a country has a D indicator, we urge Americans not to travel to that country. And we've also joined the 2021 Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention and State-to-State Relations, explicitly recognizing that arbitrary arrests and detentions are contrary to international human rights law and urging collaborative work to pressure states to stop engaging in these egregious practices. So we tell our citizens not to travel to countries that engage in practices of wrongful detentions. We cut off those who are involved in the wrongful detention from the legitimate financial system. And we work with the international community to condemn the egregious practice of using innocent citizens as pawns. And we in the administration, in the time we have left, are continuing to do everything we can to try to bring home the remaining Americans who are wrongfully detained overseas. I'm humbled to be on this panel, and I really look forward to this conversation today. And thank you again for inviting me to participate.
Thank you for all you do and the successes of this year, especially for a friend of ours, for Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was a personal friend of Senator McCain, means the world to us. It was a once-in-a-generation swap. The last one happened 39 years ago, so thank you for that and for all the people that are free. Next, we'll turn to Colonel Costa, Chris Costa, whose 35-year government career included 25 years as a United States Army intelligence officer. During the first year of the Trump administration, Chris was appointed as a special assistant to the president and senior director for counterterrorism at the White House. Chris?
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this board. I, too, am humbled to be sitting next to Jen and, of course, Diane, and all the people in this room. As I look around, people that continue to contribute to this particular fight on recovering hostages and wrongful detainees. My message will be brief. Hopefully, there'll be some questions I think we'll take from the audience, but I want to be encouraging. I want to offer some positive words in terms of transition and the fundamental question that we're looking at today, which is what happens in the future? What happens with the next administration in terms of hostages? And I can provide some context because on Inauguration Day 2017, I started with the Trump administration, and we continued from the previous administration the great work that was done by Jen Easterly and Josh Geltzer. We continued that work. And I'm going to offer you a headline from an op-ed in 2018. You can go back and find it from the Washington Post, and it says a lot about who we are. And that is, the headline read, "Trump, Obama have something in common: hostages." Imagine that. Let that sink in. So the encouraging message is, I am confident that there will be continuity from the current administration, the work from Jen and her team, and Josh Geltzer and others, to the future administration. That was one area that was sacrosanct. And I was armed with Presidential Policy Directive 30 and people who had previously worked in the Obama administration, like Jen Easterly and like Josh Geltzer, in talking to families, and we understood the importance of the continuity. Without a blueprint, we still were relatively young, right? PPD 30 wasn't signed until 2015. I was just reminded of that. So you can add President Biden to that headline. We could update that op-ed. All the presidents, each president has learned through this process. And I think there'll be an evolution of work, regardless of who the president is, because this work is not Republican. It's not Democrat. It's the people's work. It's about the families. It's about the hostages. It's about the wrongful detainees. Just a couple other points. I have to acknowledge the ambassadors that have previously worked as the special presidential envoy for hostage affairs. Just this morning, as I reflected on what are the words I'm going to offer today to this august group, I sent a text probably at 4 a.m. because Robert O'Brien is probably in California, but I texted Robert to remind him that I continue to be inspired by his work, his example. But I had no Robert O'Brien on day one of the inauguration. We had no SPEHA. We had no ambassador. We had no effective and efficient team at State Department. We had good people there, but it was small. It was relatively it was not robust. It was not manned appropriately. And we had no Robert O'Brien. We had Julia Nashawat, who was working very, very hard. But we were missing an important piece of this, which was the diplomacy aspect of recovery and wrongful detainees. All of that said, Ambassador O'Brien came on board. We brought home Caitlin Coleman in October 2017, and President Trump saw firsthand the recovery process when we brought Caitlin Coleman home. And I think that began his understanding, his deeper understanding of the hostage enterprise through that success. And since then, Robert O'Brien picked up the ball, and we are all grateful that Ambassador Roger Carstens became the ambassador responsible for SPEHA and has continued the tireless work. So I think we should all be encouraged that we have a lot of work to do. And if Roger was here, he would probably say it. So I'm going to tell you what we've shared between us many times before. We who were in the government want to hold the government accountable. We continue to hold them accountable. And individuals like Roger Carstens sticks out their chest proverbially and says, hold me accountable. So we all need to hold the government accountable and continue to do that. So those are my encouraging words for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That is so important. And just a quick note, Ambassador Carstens, as I understand, is the highest held over appointee from the Trump administration. And that's a testament to both his character and this issue. So thank you for your work and for doing all of this. Last but not least, Diane Foley, the American mother of hostages. That's the title of her book. I'll plug it for you. It's an amazing book. So, Diane, you started this all 2 days from now will be the anniversary of Jim's kidnapping.
12 years ago. How far we've come, my friends, really since 2014 when we really abandoned the 4 Americans and several others in that time frame. We've come so far, and that's thanks to every administration since. We've seen this as a nonpartisan issue, and we must fight together that it stay that we learn from one another. Those of us who worked in this space know how incredibly difficult it is to bring people home. It is one of the most difficult challenges as a nation, frankly. Because we have to deal with captors who are using human beings as political pawns for their agenda. So it requires the very best of us. And thanks to so many of you, the best of us have stepped up to this challenge. I mean, the fact that more than 160 have come home from all over the world is truly extraordinary. So I just commend everyone involved in all that, because it's, so the biggest challenge before us is that we want to have the most effective transition possible. We want to learn from the Biden administration. I particularly have loved the way they've brought together coalitions of our Western partners to look at this subject, that it is something we really need to work on together because it continues to be a national security threat. As you all know, both terrorists and governments who want to find leverage with us are targeting our people. So it really requires the very best of us in terms of deterrence and cooperation. And I also just briefly want to challenge the incoming administration. I hope they'll consider a government and non-government review of how is our hostage enterprise doing. Here we are 10 years later. We've learned so much. We've recognized how difficult it is. And our research with hostage families shows us that we still have a long ways to go. So the challenge is before us. And I'm really hopeful that we can dare to look at ourselves and see what has worked, what hasn't, and what we need to do to keep us all safer. So I'm looking forward to working with the new administration. I'm really hoping that we can learn from each other as we go forward to bring our people home.
Thank you, Diane. As Jake Sullivan said of you, you really turned tragedy into purpose, and you showed us all, and you keep showing us how to do this work. So thank you for being here, and for all of you. I'll just have one question, and we'll open up to the audience if that's okay. I know we need to close by 9:30. So my one question, whoever wants to take it first, and all of you have touched a little bit on it. In the first 100 days of the Trump administration, what is the one thing that you would ask either the Trump administration or the new Congress to do? So, Chris, if you want to take this one first.
I'll take that on. And I would just offer that the presidents traditionally and throughout history have a honeymoon period where they can come on board and use that new leverage to do good things. And I think importantly and high on that list is to use the leverage the president has, the uncertainty of how the administration is going to deal with a range of issues, and use this time to sway foreign entities who are wrongfully holding Americans, use that leverage to bring them home in that first 100 days. So I expect that the president learned during the first administration that he has that kind of leverage, and I expect that to be used in the first 100 days. This should be a significant priority for the next administration.
I'll just add that we are going to use every single moment of every day up until January 20th to continue to do what we can to bring the remaining wrongfully detained Americans and hostages home. we recognize that we are not going to be able to succeed on bringing everybody home by January 20th. And so we just really hope that the next administration, as Diane said, this is a nonpartisan, this is a bipartisan issue, picks up the work where we left it. And I look forward to having an opportunity to talk to the transition team and turning over the work so that they can pick up seamlessly where we left off.
And I would just reiterate that I would challenge the next administration to consider a non-government and governmental review of where we are. Because we've got to remember that the current hostage enterprise was set up, PPD 30 was set up to look at hostage cases. It did not look at the even more complex issue of wrongful detainees and how that intersects with our foreign policy, often interferes. And all of that has made this an ever more challenging issue. So I would love us to, as a nation, to consider looking at, because much of the world is looking to us, for leadership in this area. They're really looking to us, well, how's this SPEHA working? How can we deal with this as Western partners? Because it is a true threat to all of us. So that would be my hope in the next.
Thank you, Diane. I'm going to open it up. We have 5 minutes. If anyone wants to ask a question, we can pass around the mic.
While you're thinking about your questions, I always have questions. And nice to see everyone. I'm sorry I'm late. I came from New Jersey this morning. Jen, my question is actually for you. So we have a captive audience here. Are there tools that would have been helpful for you in this administration that we should be thinking about for the future for people who are in your role or in the roles within that enterprise?
So it's a great question. And I will say that there are so many amazing advocates and organizations out there who come and meet with us regularly who do, I think, such a good and critically important job of elevating this issue. And I think I would just encourage and hope that expect that work will continue. I think it's critically important and it is so helpful. I hope to be able to participate in some of those efforts from the outside as well after I leave. One of the things that I think is absolutely important, and I mentioned this, is the D indicators and the travel warnings. We issue those for a reason. And we would welcome help in helping educate the American public about places where individuals should not travel. Those are issued based on factual assessments of the behavior of particular governments. And we know that that information is not sufficiently reaching the American public in a way that yields sufficient changes in behavior. We will continue, obviously, to fight for any American that's wrongfully detained and unjustly detained or held hostage overseas. But one area where we could really use help is helping Americans get access to information so that Americans themselves also make better decisions about where they travel and when they travel to particular places.
Yeah,
Thank you all for your insights, and thank you for having me here today. So as a sister of a former hostage, we fled Iran, yet my brother went back to visit his home country. This idea of looking at these designations, you're right, it's not getting to the average individual who thinks they're an ordinary American doing ordinary things and thus not at risk. But I think at some point we have to also become aware of the fact that we know smoking is not good for us, that millions of people smoke. We have lots of, in the health field anyway, we have lots of things that we know we shouldn't be doing and we do anyway. So I'm really stuck on this issue. We talk about it as if it's like an untapped area of prevention. And I'm wondering at some point, do we get to think about the fact that just information isn't going to keep people from going and that we need perhaps more significant interventions?
I mean, it's a great question. I think information helps. I don't think information will solve the problem. I agree with you. And I think what you're asking is whether or not we put certain travel restrictions in certain countries. And that I think it's worth having that conversation. That's obviously very controversial, and there's all kinds of reasons why, even as you point out, people with information make decisions that it's worth the risk to visit an ailing family member or engage in an activity that's deeply personal and important to an individual. And so, there's hard questions there about whether we as a nation allow people to make those personal choices, ideally with all the information accessible to them and ingested as they're making those decisions, or whether we dictate certain choices to those individuals. And,
Is there hesitation at the high levels to come up with sort of travel restrictions? I mean, is that even a realistic
I think it is a
strategy?
very blunt instrument to tell Americans that certain countries are off limits for travel. I think it certainly is something that perhaps should be included in the review that Diane is recommending, but it is a very blunt issue. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question, because I know our panelists have to leave. Anyone have any questions? All right, if no questions, let's thank Jen Daskell, Chris Costa, and Diane Foley for joining us here today. And thank you all. And we're now going to turn to the closed door session, but please give them a round of applause.
Is the Hostage Task Force co-chair at the House of Representatives. She's from Michigan, and she has been instrumental in the recovery of Paul Whelan and others. So we're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I'll just talk from here. I know you guys have got morning, and it was great to hear some of this previous panel. And thank you for the interesting comments. I was absorbing them with Diane. It's always great to hear. And we're so grateful for your expertise. And Sarah, we're grateful for yours as well. This is really a special, but somewhat burdened community. Because you don't see this status, and you don't see this unforgiving. I know there's a mic, come on, but there's an unforgiving reality that you all have faced, and to be here at the McCain Institute, which we're so grateful for your Freedom for Political Prisoners initiative, and to do that under the name of the Institute and alongside Arizona State is really quite significant, and we salute you. This is some of the driving work in the Congress for me, and working alongside the different partners. And I know we've got federal agencies and partners here, and others who've been in the White House and in and out, and then obviously our outside stakeholders. But you see, I'm here with my colleague, French Hill. And we come from two different parts of the country, two different political parties, but we come together time and time again to reach solutions, to come up with legislation, and to support. And we have been working on this task force for the last couple of years now, shining a light, bringing together other members, supporting the families, coordinating among the agencies, and acting. And it's a really big deal for us in the Congress in terms of some of the ways in which we don't get credit for working together. Not that we need credit, but everyone in the news just wants to talk about the dysfunction. But this has been a real bright light of coming together to make sure that that flag gets passed. And French and I can both talk about, seeing Sarah, having her, so many of you coming into our office. We need the National Hostage Day, the Recognition Day, March 9th. We have a flag for it. When Paul Whelan, 5.5 years, over 2,000 days, wrongfully detained in a Russian prison, came home, he wrapped himself in the flag. He wrapped himself, and that was very prominent. And so, and that flag also symbolizes, though, the ongoing prisoners, the ongoing political prisoners and wrongful detainees. And so we want to use our ongoing legislative authority to make sure that government is acting at its optimal capabilities for its families and the families of the wrongfully detained and the hostages, but also, and most importantly, for the individuals who are suffering. And in some cases, depending on what actor this is, and they're all brutal actors, but there's different gradations. Like the Russians just want something and they wanted the trade. And I actually just saw Paul Whelan today, and he sends his greetings. He's on another panel on the other side of town. I was going to bring him here, but he sends his greeting, and he'll tell you. I mean, he said the Russians took me, and then right away they said they wanted a trade. They wanted Victor Bout. And he said, I was in prison alongside so many others. There's like 300,000 Tajiks wrongfully detained in a Russian prison. It's all about money. It's slave labor. And they have this trade and they have these things going on. Well, that's so different, Diane, than what happened to your son. And it was a different fate. And we know in the Middle East, this is, and Sarah, impacts you too. I mean, this is a different reality. We've got 9 Americans who were taken hostage in Gaza, non-state actor. We don't even have Red Cross access. Then we have a war surrounding it. Then we have politics surrounding it. I salute my friends in the, administration and the government. You don't have to be political because there's a lot of things around that. And then we've got to look at the aftermath, the ongoing realities that families struggle with. Paul was cut off from his job. He's returned home to his parents' house, not his longtime apartment. He hasn't returned home to a job. He's trying to do the basic things like get a driver's license and different, his notary license back and all of that. Still doesn't have a job. He told me today he's living off his GoFundMe. And so we've got to look at some of the after effects as well, which is, maybe a next chapter. Then if you're not lucky to come home, when and how does life insurance get recognized? When is the support for the families fully recognized? Yes, we got the fund to help families advocate. And that, French and I worked on that together. It was a big deal to get that into the bill, into last year's NDAA, that we have now created a fund to help families advocate, because we know that there are oftentimes, the nexus for their loved one. We know that Paul's parents had the most information. I have since learned that Paul Whelan talked to his family daily. I didn't realize that. I thought the whole time he was over there, I thought it was weekly. And I'm a government actor. I was sanctioned by the Russians when the Ukraine war started. So, I was always sensitive for how much I, as a member of Congress, could interact with him directly, even sending letters or different statements that was going to be taken on as political. So then we start to say, okay, well, we're leaning on the family and for their collection of information. And again, this unfortunate burden that no one signs up for to get, put in these roles. And so providing that support for families to advocate is of utmost importance, but there's other chapters to this work. And I think the last piece of this, because I always am so eager to hear what French has to say, is that as our work is far from finished, we, and McCain and what the Levinson family's up to and Foley family and so many of you, and this incredible network of individuals, we have got to focus on deterrence. We have really got to work on, we've got, kind of forthcoming, improved legislation around that. But those marks up there, rather, I call it chicken scratch, but it's not chicken scratch because it's real people. That is a reality. And what happened in the Middle East, what happened in Israel on October 7th, 2023, was this attack on all of humanity. And it was saying, no, we're going to kidnap you. We're going to take you and we're going to hold you hostage in the most brutal way possible. Dennis, I think, maybe mentioned and some of the other gentlemen over here, the terrorist element of this. And they are using that and they're emboldened by these other autocratic actors. And Americans have a target on their back. So we have got to work on deterrence. We've got to work on communication. And we've got to continue to take this work very seriously. So anytime, I mean, I will get together quarterly like this. I just think this is fabulous that we have made this time to sit at this table together and chew very deeply on some of these realities and some solutions. And thank you to our friends who are working in the government as well alongside us in Congress to implement some of the laws that we've put into place and to assist these families in these realities that are facing our modern day democracy. And with that, Sarah, I'm going to yield back.
I'm going to yield to Pedro.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I wanted to say that we're incredibly grateful that you're here, and you and Congressman French Hill were actually part of the inspiration for this whole meeting back in March, where you hosted us for the press conference celebrating the first day. You said, invite us to the McCain Institute, and that's why we're here. So thank you so much, and we are deeply honored and grateful.
Yeah.
So thank you. And we'll take you up on that on meeting quarterly. So thank you so much. It's my honor to introduce Congressman French Hill. He represents Arkansas's 2nd District, and he's the co-chair of the House Hostage Task Force. So thank you so much.
You bet. Well, thank all of you for having Congresswoman Stevens and I to join you today to talk about this important issue and think about the next steps that we need to consider. And it's always a pleasure to be with the groups that have come together, and especially our patron saint, Diane Foley. Thank you for your just extraordinary communication ability and passion. And I'm grateful to Ambassador Carsons and Ambassador O'Brien that preceded him because I think state has taken this responsibility quite seriously, although it's an awkward one. In other words, it's hard. You can't really accomplish everything under the way they operate. And that's why Haley and I are so dedicated to focusing on the transparency for our families. So we want to give the tools through amendments at the Levinson Act to increase that transparency, lower the anxiety. With the roundtable that we had that Chairman McCall hosted, last year, and many of you participated and were there, the anxiety of not knowing why I'm not designated. My loved one is not designated, and I don't even know the time frame in which that person might be designated. Or if there's an argument to not designate them, right? All that legality just cuts into the emotional tension that already exists on behalf of our families and is not something that our members are experts in. I mean, that's a project for Elle up in the State Department to try to figure out that right balance. So transparency, these amendments that we're talking about, the ones I've introduced on transparency, the ones that will continue to be introduced, I think are important to improving the Levinson Act. And there's a tremendous outpouring of support on a bipartisan basis in the Congress for this. And I think that's good. And I congratulate Haley for her passion. I'm not going to repeat the things that she said. We are proud of the work we've done together on and what is currently pending about reestablishing credit, tax obligations, the flag, the day, because I give this group and your efforts an A for the awareness factor on your topics for your meeting. I think you ought to grade yourself really as an A in awareness. That's both in the U.S. government, which doesn't mean they're responsive, but the awareness is high. No, really, this is the way to think about it. Your awareness factor there is high. We have a special envoy that is certainly keen here, even if they're not in charge of in every one of these instances. Congress is much more aware. I thank Ted Deutsch from Florida, he and I got together to initiate this back in 2021 because of what he and I were both going through in our districts. Myself with the Kamamaz family taken hostage in Syria and is no longer with us, sadly. But, we all have dealt with this. So I think awareness is good. Return, I think, is better. We're talking about legislative ways to make return better and more appropriate and more supportive of these families. I was in Nigeria last June and visited Tigran Gambaryan in prison, in Kuje prison in Abuja, which is a real unattractive place. It's where they keep Boko Haram terrorists, and then the Boko Haram attacked the prison and blew it up to let all their prisoners out. And this is where they put Tigran Gambaryan, a former IRS agent for the United States, on charges of tax evasion and money laundering, which he has nothing to do with. He was there representing Binance to help stop tax evasion. And he was in prison there, wrongfully detained by the Nigerians, basically for 8 months. He's now home. He's getting medical treatment. He's back in Georgia, and return. I think we put a premium on return, and I share the congratulations to the Biden administration on the enormous, complex Russian prisoner swap that resulted in Americans coming home and cooperation from some of our allied friends. So I think awareness good, return good, support improving. People, what can we do more on support? But I'm with you. I'm so glad you said it. We don't have any deterrence here, and we don't have any justice here because of the legal reasons that you outlined on what's a crime and what's not in jurisdiction. And that's something that I think we need help from state and DOJ to actually define that carefully on behalf of American citizens. We can't solve it for everybody. I've been very involved with the special investigation in Russia and the special regarding Ukraine and the special investigation process for Assad in Syria. So I know that the line of evidence and the documentation has been very effective, and the UN resources that have gone to that are good, but those are pretty egregious cases, excessive cases. I mean, invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and then what Assad has done since 2011 in Syria. Those are unique, I'd say unique cases. So how do we go beyond seeking justice when you don't have two sovereign nations attacking and killing their own people or invading a sovereign nation? So I think your point on justice, I think, is important, how we identify that for Americans. And then this deterrence issue, I believe in the case of Nigeria, and Abuja, Dylan can help me, Lawler's bill, was that directed at Nigeria, or is that a hypothetical? McCormick bill, yeah. So Mike Lawler in New York, Rich McCormick, Georgia, who represents Tigran Gambaryan's family. These are an imposition of sanctions, directing the president to impose sanctions on a sovereign government who takes an American blue passport holder. But that then connects this issue of the defining, is it wrongfully detained or not, and a lot of complexity. But I don't view that as a big deterrent in today's society. I don't think non-state actors or state actors seem to give a dang about this. So I think this is work for us to collaborate on with you, thinking about deterrence. And the one final thing I'll say about deterrence is we're very libertarian, in America. And I say that happily. We love our liberty, we love our independence, and we think that way about everybody. It doesn't make any difference if you're a Democrat or Republican. Americans are independent thinkers and independent doers. And one of those things is, if I want to go with the New York Times on a hiking trip in Iran, I'm going. Well, yeah, but you really shouldn't do that. Well, I'm going. It's the one, I'm trying to hit 90 countries, and, or I want to hike the so-and-so trail. Okay. And this is and state puts out our warnings, right? You can't drive from Laredo, Texas. I lived in Texas for 10 years. You can't drive from Laredo to Monterey. It has the same travel warning on that highway, Highway 40, about an hour and a half. Used to be we all did it when we were in business in Texas. You can't, it's the same rating as going to Syria on the state's website. So we rate these countries, and they spend enormous resources debating what that should be. But what are we saying to Americans about that? And what obligations do Americans have? This is not the case of journalists or people assigned to do, business. You get my point. But for ordinary Americans who are on a, quote, hiking trip, and they stray over the border into Iran, how do we help do that? And I'm a libertarian at heart. I mean, do we ask them, you can do that, but you must register with the consulate and the embassy, and you must take this phone, and you pay for this and you pay for that? Because I think that's part of it, is we have a lot of inadvertence of risking blue passport holders who are out in that domain. And I don't know what percentage it would be of the people who've been taken hostage, but it's not zero. And we've talked about that among our staff and members on how do we warn people more able. This is not a country you need to go try to add to your list. So thank you for engaging with us. Thank you for making this task force successful. Thank you for helping educate all of our members. How can we help a family in our district that's suffering through this horrible situation? So we're committed to working with you and continue to do better. Thanks for having us both.
Thank you so much to both of you. And I'll just make the comment that every time I advocate for travel restrictions, my husband, who I think is a libertarian at heart, is like, you can't take away travel. You can't tell people where they can or cannot go.
True story is that's my constituent. I have a retired constituent who's in her early 60s. She's a travel-aholic. She never, and her spouse never goes because he thinks she's nuts. But her dad had hit something like 110 countries by the time he died at age 88. And this is a deal with her, but she picks really, really bad places. And I said, man, there's 192 of them. Start over here. Start over here. She wanted to go to Chad last year and Niger. She's, you get my point. So I don't know what the balance is, but I'm open to at least having a flashing red beacon on our website.
Can I just say something to that?
Yeah.
I think the other interesting thing to that is our universities. They really encourage their doctoral students to go to these countries and do doctoral research. And I think tapping into the universities and making sure that they're informed about the risk of and I'm an example of someone who, my advisor said, you could get your PhD done in 2 years if you go to Iran and do your research there. As a young student, you think you're no one can touch you. It's the responsibility of the universities to warn their students. And we've seen this with Princeton.
Right.
Multiple times.
Thank you so much for raising that. And I don't want to over dramatize it, but it is a component of this issue, right? And so that's a very interesting institutional point I had.
So thank you so much again. And I think one thing that's come up out of today is that any of those 5 pillars we could have a whole day discussion on, and we want to. So we're going to commit to finding a way to do that. And we'd love to have you back again.
Can I just say one thing on behalf of SPEHA? We just want to thank Rep. Stevens, Rep. Hill. You guys have been amazing partners. Jasmine, Dylan, you guys are the real deal. You deeply care about this issue. You're passionate about your people. We're so grateful for the collaboration we have with you. I know the day after Paul Whelan came home, Jasmine reached out. We were on the phone talking about it. I know you care deeply about the common loss family. We talked about this at the beginning of the session, but Roger, Ambassador Parsons, is always like, hold us accountable. You do, and we appreciate that. You make us better. So just on behalf of SPEHA, thank you for being here today.
So I think we can close the on the record portion of your, and then I think we wanted to just come back to the one